in the Realms of Mediumship by Chico Francisco Candido Xavier and inspired by the Spirit Andre Luis. Chapter 26, Psychometry. Our brief course was nearing its end. Alice didn't have time to grace us with further lessons. He was a worker committed to a wide variety of services. Although Ilario and I understood that, we felt somewhat sad. The assistant, however, did all he could to keep up our usual enthusiasm. We were crossing streets and squares when we found ourselves in front of a museum where some late visitors were still lingering. Wanting to take advantage of the time we had left for a few more observations and comments, Alice invited us to enter, saying, "It's possible to conduct very interesting studies in a place like this. You must have heard references to psychometry. In a good synonymic example, the term psychometry, as used in experimental psychology, means to register, to evaluate mental activity. But in mediumistic work, it designates the faculty of reading impressions and memories by touching ordinary objects." We crossed a wide doorway, and once inside the building, we saw a large number of discarnate spirits coming and going, along with incarnates looking at articles of bygone times with much admiration. A lot of spirits, with minds fixated on the past, frequent places like this for the simple pleasure of recalling it, remarked the assistant. I noticed that a number of valuable objects, with a few exceptions, were enveloped in opaque fluids that formed a grayish or brownish mass in which luminous points were visible. Noticing my curiosity, Alice explained benevolently, "All the objects framed by those fluidic substances are strongly remembered or frequently visited by those who used to possess them." Not far away was a curious clock encircled by a luminous whitish band. Alice suggested that I touch it, and almost instantly, in my mind's eye, I saw a lovely family meeting in which an older couple was enjoying a conversation with 4 young people in the prime of their lives. With that living picture projected in my inner mind, I examined the pleasant and stately room. The Austrian furniture added a sobriety and nobility to the environment, which was decorated with vases of flowers and valuable paintings. The clock was there as well, dominating the scene from an old wall, adorned with care. Noting my surprise, the assistant continued, "I can perceive the image without directly touching the clock. It used to belong to a respectable 19th century family. It has retained the thought forms of the couple that acquired it, and who from time to time visit the museum for the joy of remembering. The clock is an object animated by the reminiscences of its former owners, reminiscences that are rekindled in time through the spiritual ties they still hold for the loving circle they left behind." Ilario touched the precious piece and said, "That means that we are seeing images imprinted by them through vibrations." "Exactly," confirmed Alice. "The clock is enveloped by the mental currents of those still attached to it, much like the copper is sensitized by the electric current while conducting electric energy. As we examine it in its present state, we are immediately tuning into the memories of the people who cherish it." Ilario thought for a few moments and remarked, "So, if we were interested in meeting these people, an object like this one could be an intermediary for doing so." "Yes, exactly," confirmed the instructor. "We could use any object upon which their memory is focused. Anything that radiates from our thoughts would serve to facilitate this connection." "The study of mental power is so very important," I remarked, greatly impressed. Alice smiled and commented, "Thought spreads our own emanations everywhere it is projected. We leave spiritual vestiges wherever we project the rays of our mind, just as an animal leaves traces of its characteristic odor, making itself easily trackable by the dog's olfactory sensitivity. When freed from the dense body, our senses become more acute, and thus we can easily perceive such phenomena within the sphere that limits our evolutionary aptitudes." "That would lead us to believe," considered my colleague, "that we don't have the resources to register the thoughts of those more evolved than us." "That's right. Those who have reached a level that we cannot even imagine have ascended to other realms, transcending our manner of being and expressing ourselves. Their thoughts vibrate on another frequency altogether. Of course, they can accompany and assist us, because it is the law that spirits from a higher order can come down to spirits of a lower order whenever they want, but we in turn cannot go up to them. Alice reflected for a moment and continued. Let's use symbolism to grasp this more easily. What occurs between them and us also occurs between us and souls that are less evolved than we are. For example, we can care for the interests of primitive or backward tribes, but they cannot do the same for us. We can grasp their customs and knowledge, but they cannot understand a thing about our culture. Thought conditions us to the circle in which we have to or deserve to live, and only at the price of our own efforts or sure evolution are we able to improve it, overcoming limitations to enable it to vibrate in higher spheres. The assistant looked at us kindly and added, but let's avoid digressions not in tandem with our principal objectives. Let's say, I said in turn, that we focus our attention on a more detailed examination. Would we be able to find out the history of the material that the clock is made of? Without a doubt. It would demand more work and time, but it would be a perfectly viable undertaking. So, each object, concluded Ilario, can be both an intermediary for contacting the persons interested in it and also a record of facts of nature. No more, no less, confirmed Aulus, sure of himself. We have to remember that the paleontologist is able to reconstruct pieces of prehistoric fauna from a simple bone found at random. When we purify our sensitivity more intensely, we can find in simple abandoned objects expressive traits of people who possess them or the occurrences they witnessed through the vibrations those objects retain. And smiling, he added, souls and objects, in the position they're situated, retain something of time and space, which are eternal in the memory of life. Next, we stopped to study a beautiful painting from the 18th century, but which did not display any signs of a fluidic shroud. In fact, it was an isolated treasure. We couldn't establish any sort of external spirit contact through it. Alice assumed his usual attitude of benevolent teacher and explained, if examined more deeply, this painting would be an interesting record, offering us information regarding its components. However, it would not work as an intermediary of spiritual relationships, because it has been completely forgotten by its creator and those who probably owned it. We went a little farther. In a large gallery, 2 gentlemen and 3 ladies were admiring a peculiar mirror. A discarnate young woman with an expression of profound sorrow was next to it. One of the women praised the beauty of the mirror's frame, and the girl, like an angry guardian, approached her and touched her shoulders. The woman shivered involuntarily from the unexpected chill and told her companions, "There's a strange feeling like a funeral chamber. We'd better go." After some good-humored remarks, the group followed her in another direction. The spirit, who had not noticed our presence, seemed to be pleased with the solitude and, under a strange fascination, began gazing at the mirror. Alice touched her gently, and then touched the object attentively and commented, "Do you see what happened?" Of the small group of visitors, the sister who felt the girl's touch possesses remarkable mediumistic sensitivity. If she were to cultivate her abilities and then probe the mirror, she would immediately establish contact with the girl, still attached so madly to it. She would penetrate her secrets and would get to know her inner drama, because she would immediately assimilate her mental wavelength, capturing its images. Ilario was incapable of controlling the curiosity smoldering in his mind, and asked about the girl. What was she doing here, in this tomb of memories? Why was she so anxiously interested in a simple mirror, with little significance? As if anticipating our question, the assistant answered without hesitation. I touched the object myself to get information. This highly original mirror was entrusted to the girl by a boy who promised to marry her. I can see his romantic figure in her memories. He was the son of a French couple who had fled to Brazil during the French Revolution in 1791. A boy at the time, he grew up in Rio and became a man. He met the girl and won her heart. As they were thinking about marriage after having fallen deeply in love, the French couple, encouraged by Napoleon's success in Europe, decided to return home. The young man was decimated but didn't fight his father's orders. he bid his fiancée farewell and implored her to keep the mirror as a keepsake until he could come back and they would live happily ever after. However, in France, he was captured by the enchantments of another woman and never returned. He quickly forgot his responsibilities and promises and became indifferent. With her mind set on his promise, the poor girl continues to wait for him. The mirror is the pledge of her happiness. I can imagine the long journey she must have made in the course of time, watching over this keepsake as if it were her property until it finally came to rest in this museum. This matter, I ventured with concern, compels us to reflect on the ancient tales about enchanted jewels. Yes, said the assistant. The influence doesn't proceed from the jewels themselves, but from the forces that accompany them. Ilario, who had been pondering the lesson, considered. What if someone were to acquire the object and take it home? Of course, cut in the instructor, that person would be taking along the discarnate girl. Would that be fair? Alice smiled lightly and said, Ilario, life never makes a mistake. It is possible that someone could come here, fall in love with the object, and want it. Who? The young man who gave his word, causing the mental fixation of this poor creature, or the woman who lured him away from his promise. Reincarnated today or tomorrow, they might come here one day to take her as a daughter or companion to redeem their debt. But couldn't we assume the possibility that the girl could be attracted by some healing circle and rid herself of her disturbance? Yes, agreed Alice, that's possible. Nonetheless, examining the harmony of the law, the meeting of the three is inevitable. All the problems we create can be resolved only by us. The conversation was invaluable, but our responsibilities compelled us to move on. On our way out, we passed by the administrative office. Seeing 2 empty chairs next to the small work table, my colleague asked a question with the obvious intent to complete the lesson. I think that those 2 chairs are used by museums' employees. If we sat in them, would we be able to make contact with the individuals who usually sit in them? Yes, if we wanted that type of experience, said the assistant. And what about incarnates? If someone uses objects that belong to someone else, clothes, beds, or adornments, could he or she sense the thoughts of those who used them? Perfectly well. However, in order to capture them, he or she would have to possess an acute psychic sensitivity. The marks of our individuality vibrate wherever we are, and through them we cause good or evil in those who come in contact with us. Is everything we have observed mediumship? Yes. In spite of such phenomena being listed by experimenters of the scientific world under different terminology, among them pragmatic cryptesthesia, tactile metanomy, or telesthesia. Leading us back onto the street, he concluded, in everything we see integration, affinity, and attunement. And there's one thing we can be sure of. Through our thoughts, we commune with one another in the plenitude of universal life.